Welcome to my lesson about project-based learning, or what we're going to refer to as PBL. So let's go ahead and get started. Just to let you know, all of the information has come from this website, which was a previous assignment, and the link is right here should you want to explore any information further. So what comprises project-based learning? Well, basically, even though there's been a lot of research done, a lot of papers written about PBL, what I've done is summed it up into 6 essential elements, and we're going to take a look at those individually. So the first element that we're going to look is this idea of multifaceted projects. What a multifaceted project is where you have different components that come together to create this larger project or this larger product. So the way that I like to think about it is this idea of Legos. You have these smaller Legos, and of course we use Legos to come together and we end up building something larger, something much more unique. Now, the next thing that we have is this idea of the driving question. And the driving question is the focus of our PBL assignment. It is not going to be a yes or no solution. It's basically an issue or a problem that keeps the students interested. It keeps them looking, researching, questioning. It basically keeps their attention. And unlike traditional projects, what we are having to do in a PBL environment, especially with a driving question, is we are having to basically give up some of our control. We are acting more as guides as opposed to leaders. We are wanting the students to facilitate their own research, their own ideas, their own solutions, and maybe even their own final product. Now, this is not to say that we have no rules, no expectations, or anything like that. In fact, you may think, well, does that mean I have to lower my standards? And the answer to that is no, you do not have to lower your standards. If anything, you actually get to increase your standards. And the reason why is because if we're going to give control over to the students or give more control over to the students, then we get to get something in return. And what we get in return is we get higher expectations. So it's a give and take. And from my experience, because the students enjoy having that control, they are much more prone to actually meet those higher expectations. Basically the same idea or concept that's behind playing video games. Students are driven in a video game by the challenge. You would think that they would get frustrated. You would think that they would quit, but students are actually driven by the challenge. They keep going because they want to solve the problem. They want to get to the end. They want to succeed. And when they do get to the end, or when they do solve a problem or a task or a side quest, then they feel a sense of accomplishment and success, and it keeps them even more driven. So it's the same concept that we have even in a video game. So we want to keep our students, of course, driven with the assignments that we give them. And one of the ways that we can keep the students interested and driven is by this idea of student choice and voice. One of the things that makes PBL so effective is by giving students a choice and giving them a voice in their learning. It becomes personal. We all like to have choices, whether it's in what we dress, in what we eat, in where we go, our entertainment, it doesn't matter. We like having choices, and students are no different. Basically, choice equals investment. And if students feel that their choice and their voice is being valued and heard, then they feel much more invested in their learning. And I like to, again, go back to this idea of the video game. When playing a Batman video game, the game has already set forth certain standards that I cannot change, just as a teacher would have certain standards that will not change. I have to be Batman. And in order to beat the game, there is going to be an end villain or objective that I have to meet in order to beat the game. But within the game, I still have certain choices that allow me to customize my Batman. And so my best friend and I can both be playing the same game, but I may pick different gadgets than my best friend. I may have different skills or combat styles than my best friend. I may buy different things than my best friend. So although we may both finish the game at the same time, and we are both very happy and feeling very accomplished by the completion of the game, game. We may have done it in different ways. Of course, how we beat the game is going to be different because, again, what we have selected was completely our choice. So although we both have to be Batman, although we both have to beat the game in the same way, the same villain, we get to customize our character the way that we want to. We have a choice. And so the concept is still the same when assigning a PBL project. So here, what we have are some traditional assignments, and what we have done is we have converted these traditional assignments into project-based learning assignments. So for example, the first assignment says, create a PowerPoint that shows how people use algebra in real life. Well, that's a pretty standard, pretty basic assignment. So let's take a look at how we can make this more, project-based learning. You are hiring for your business and only want the best. In order to hire quality people, you will administer a test to determine the applicant's abilities. This test will include 3 advanced math questions. With a partner, decide which business industry you will be hiring for and develop the math questions for your hiring test. You must have at least 2 algebra questions. The third is your choice. Explain how each question you developed applies to your business. Include the questions and solutions on a separate page. So right off the bat, we can see that, first of all, we have 3 different components as well as student choice and voice. The first component is that the students do have to decide which business or industry that they're going to be hiring for. So we may have one group that picks automotive, another group that picks computers, another group that picks cosmetology. It's really up to them. We have put no limits on the business or industry that they get to pick. Then the next component is that they're going to develop their own math questions. So again, they get to come up with this test, these questions for this test. And they, of course, can make the questions as complex as they want. And then finally, what they're going to have to do is explain how do those questions fit into that industry. Because they've developed their own questions, I need to see a connection between their questions and cosmetology, or I need to see a connection between their questions and the automotive industry. I need to see that connection. And so that, of course, gives us that higher level learning, that critical thinking. And then, of course, the final product, which will be the questions and the solutions on a separate page. So let's take a look at our next one. Write a contrast paper that describes America's and other countries' wedding customs and traditions. Your group is creating a documentary about major life events. So now let's see how we can project-based learn this. Your group is creating a documentary about major life events in America and other countries. Your group will pick either birth, weddings, or death as the focus of their documentary. Start in America and then explore some of the traditions and customs of at least 4 other countries and your major life event. Remember the rules of documentaries we have already discussed and some of the characteristics of other documentaries that we have seen. So let's take a look here at our choice and voice and components. So what we have here is we have 4 components. So even though I have standards, remember, we can still set the standards. This is our classroom. This is definitely our assignment. So I have said, okay, you can pick between birth, wedding, or death. So they still get to pick, but I have limited the choice. They're going to start in America and with their particular choice and talk about some of the traditions and customs. So notice I did not say which traditions and customs they have to pick from American culture. Then they're going to look at 4 other countries. Again, I have not told them what 4 countries they will pick. So again, they have a huge canvas that is wide open to them. And then, of course, which traditions and customs they pick from those 4 countries is completely up to them. Here we have what we can assume is some previous learning. So they're going to create a documentary. So I'm going to expect to see some characteristics of a documentary in their final product. And also, let me point out that documentaries take different forms. So how they decide to create that final documentary is really going to be up to them. Now, you may be looking at this and saying, but this was a writing assignment. I don't see any writing in this particular assignment. Well, there's nothing that says you can't add a 5th component that is a writing component. In order to get this information, they're going to have to research traditions and customs of American culture and 4 other countries. So they can turn in that research in the form of a paper, or they can storyboard their documentary, or they can create a screenplay or an outline. There's a number of writing assignments that you can incorporate into this assignment as a 5th component for this particular project-based learning criteria. So again, it's really up to you and what you want to include. But what we're doing here is, again, we're trying to increase the level of thinking that our students are doing. So let's take a look at this last assignment here. Describe how modern technology has impacted society in a negative way. So again, kind of a plain prompt that we've probably seen many times. So let's see how we can maybe amp this up a bit. With the benefits of technology also come the negatives. In your groups, identify and explain at least 3 technology-influenced problems that we now have to worry about and what solutions have been developed or are being researched. So again, what we see here is we have choice and voice. We basically are going to allow the students to identify what they consider to be technology-influenced problems. They have to explain why these are problems. Again, now we're amping it up a bit because now we're having them explain why these are problems. They may list something, they may identify something that I may not see as a problem. So I'm going to need that explanation in order to fully understand, okay, well, why would they consider it to be a problem? And then on top of that, what solutions have been developed or are being researched. Now, the reason why we have it split like this is because, of course, we want to avoid those students who say, well, there's no solution, I'm done, the end. Well, then, okay, if there's no solution, then what is being currently researched? So again, we want to make sure that the students are not trying to find the easy way out. We want to keep them, again, going down that path. We want to keep them engaged. We want them to, again, conduct that higher level critical thinking. And so here we have the 3 components to our assignment as opposed to just the simple written prompt that we had before. So the next component or the next essential of project-based learning is this idea of the real world focus. Now, I'm sure that many of you have heard this question a gazillion times. When will I ever need or use this? And personally, I don't know why the students ask this, because this is not a foreign concept. When they were young, I'm sure that many of these students, not all, but many of these students heard the story of the tortoise and the hare. Now, we know that in real life, in nature, rabbits do not raise tortoises. But it does not change the outcome of the story. Therefore, it does not change the moral, which is if you're cocky, then you're going to end up losing. And so really all we're doing here with this idea of the real world focus is we are having the students take the learning that they are doing and applying it to what is going on in their world now. Because again, sometimes the students, they don't see it automatically. They really kind of need, again, that nudge. They need that guide. They can understand that it's not the literal. We don't need them to memorize the plot for 1984. They may hate the book 1984 and may never want to talk about it again. And you know what? That's fine. But what we do want them to understand is we want them to understand the skills, ideas, and concepts and critical thinking that are applicable to their world now. Yes, they may never need the plot to 1984, but understanding, Big Brother, censorship, harshly imposed restriction, and other concepts that are in the book, these are things that are still going on even right now. And we want to make sure that the students understand the real world connection. So when you are designing your your project-based learning projects, you want to make sure that you do have that real world connection in there so that, again, they feel more connected to the assignment. They can actually see the value in it. Another essential project-based learning is this idea of ongoing evaluations, or what many of you have come to know as checks for understanding. Basically, we want to make sure that the students are on the right track. We cannot assign an assignment and then just give a due date and say, okay, turn it in and have it done correctly at this time, and then just assume that it's going to be done correctly. We want to make sure that the students are on the right track. We want to make sure that the students are, not drifting one way or the other, which, can periodically happen. And if that's the case, we would definitely want to make sure that we provide some assistance or maybe some reteaching if necessary. Now, these checks for understandings pretty much can take whatever form you want them. They can be small, they can be big, they can be, quizzes, or they can be, entire writings. It's really up to you and how you want to evaluate your students' learning as they're going through the assignments. Now, the next essential of project-based learning, or PBL, is this idea of ongoing reflection. And what you can see here is that it says that this is a non-negotiable, and it is. It is a complete non-negotiable. And the reason why is, again, let me emphasize that we want our students to develop critical thinking skills. So we've assigned them the project. They're doing the research. They're looking at the information. They're learning. They're constructing a final product. But we want them to also reflect on that learning. We want them to, of course, see the real world connection. We want them to see the controversy. We want them to question. We want them to see, how does it apply to them or the world around them, their family, the political climate of the time. We want them to think about it. Some people may think that, reflection has to always be positive, and that's actually not the case. If a student feels that what they've learned is a negative, if they feel that it is controversial or they have issues with it and they don't like it, my philosophy is that as long as a student can adequately explain why they don't like what they've learned, or the negatives of what they've learned, or why they have a problem with what they are learning, then they are thinking critically. We don't like everything that we come across, and students are no different. But we just want to make sure that they can't just say, I don't like it. Well, why don't you like it? As long as they can explain and answer that question, with purpose, then they are definitely thinking critically. With this idea of project-based learning, let's go ahead and just talk about some of the researchers that have been instrumental in the creation of PBL learning. The first we have is Benjamin Bloom, who many of us know from our education classes in college, who said that creation was his penultimate idea of mastery of learning. Bruner, who has his constructivist theory that basically said that students, as long as they are active in their knowledge, then they will construct their knowledge. And whenever I think of Bruner, don't ask me why, I think about the Brooklyn Bridge. Brooklyn, I think about a bridge and this idea of construction. So there you go, constructivist theory, Bruner's bridge, constructing this bridge of knowledge. And then you have John Dewey, who basically said that learning is not passive, that students need to do things in order to learn. And so when we look at these verbs, we basically have create, construct, and of course do. So we want to make sure that in PBL learning, that students are actually participating and they are active in the construction of their knowledge, and of course that they are creating these solutions and a final product. Other researchers that are also important to PBL are Jean Piaget, who came up with the theory of cognitive development. He basically said that, of course, our learning is scaffolded, learning builds. And then we have Lev Vygotsky, who said that we learn best in groups. And this, of course, has become really, really big in education, this idea of collaborative learning. And again, also very big in PBL. We want to make sure that students are scaffolding in their learning, that as they're going and answering questions, that they are building their knowledge. And then, of course, a lot of PBL does involve collaboration, whether they are working together in groups or in partners or doing peer reviews, peer evaluations, but we want to make sure that the students are not just working alone, that they are also getting their peers involved. So the last thing I want to talk about is technology and PBL. And the reason I want to talk about this is because it is assumed that in order to do adequate project-based learning, that technology is required. And that's actually not the case. Technology is not required for project-based learning. It does help. It does enhance the process. It, of course, gives us greater research options like databases and encyclopedia. It does allow students to be very creative because they have different programs that they can use to create videos and cartoons and games and so forth. It definitely gives them practice for the future by using technology tools because, of course, we know that they are going to need that practice. It is very efficient because we can have them do things at home that maybe we don't have time for in the classroom, or maybe there are things they can do faster on a computer than by hand. And of course, technology has increased the amount of communication that students are able to do as a group. They can, of course, text, IM, chat, Skype, WebEx, and so forth. But again, it is not a requirement. A poster board, a creation of art. These are all, final products that can result from project-based learning. Project-based learning has many faces, and technology is not the only face that it has. So hopefully this has helped you to understand project-based learning better, and I hope that this will help you with implementing PBL in your classroom. Thank you very much.